William Harris, a lonely 60-year-old Canadian widower, thought he had found love again when he married 27-year-old Priya Sharma from India. But what began as a fairy tale quickly unraveled into a shocking story of deception, betrayal, and murder that would leave an entire community reeling. William Harris had lived most of his life in a small Canadian town where everyone knew each other. At 60 years old, he was a retired factory worker who had once built a comfortable life with his late wife. But after her passing, the silence of his home grew heavier with each passing year. His children were grown and busy with their own families, leaving William to face long days with little more than memories. In that loneliness, he began searching for companionship on the internet, a place where strangers became friends and, sometimes, much more. It was there he met Priya Sharma, a young woman from India whose charm and energy drew him in instantly. She was only 27, but her words carried warmth that made William feel alive again. She told him she admired his kindness and maturity, and she spoke of dreams of building a life abroad. Their conversations stretched late into the night. William, who had once believed his chance at love was gone, found himself eagerly checking his phone each morning for Priya's messages. The attention filled a void he thought would never heal. Within months, the bond between them seemed unshakable. Friends who noticed the change in him were surprised at how quickly he seemed younger, more hopeful. When Priya suggested marriage, William did not hesitate. To him, it felt like fate was offering him a second chance. Traveling to India for the wedding was both exciting and overwhelming. The ceremony was simple, held in a modest hall filled with Priya's relatives. William, out of place yet deeply moved, believed he had found happiness again. To outsiders, the age gap was striking, but William brushed aside doubts. All he saw was a new beginning, a chance to no longer be alone. When Priya finally arrived in Canada, William welcomed her with open arms. He had spent weeks preparing their home, buying new furniture, and stocking the kitchen with her favorite foods. Neighbors watched curiously as the young bride stepped into the quiet suburban neighborhood, her colorful clothes standing out against the gray Canadian winter. For William, it was a proud moment. He introduced her to his family and friends, speaking of how lucky he was to have found love again. At first, Priya played the role of the devoted wife. She smiled politely, helped around the house, and asked questions about Canadian customs as if she were eager to adapt. Life in Canada was far different from the busy streets of India. Priya began exploring the community, joining local groups, and spending time on her phone connecting with new people. William, blinded by affection, encouraged her independence, thinking it would make her feel more at home. He showered her with gifts, new clothes, a smartphone, even jewelry, believing these gestures would show her how much he cared. She thanked him sweetly, but her eyes often wandered towards something he couldn't quite understand. To neighbors and casual friends, the couple looked unusual but happy. A 60-year-old man walking hand in hand with a much younger woman turned heads, yet no one questioned it openly. In private, William's children had their doubts, but he dismissed them, insisting that Priya truly loved him. What he didn't see was how carefully she was shaping her image. Priya seemed more interested in building connections than in building a marriage. Late-night phone calls and long hours spent on social media became part of her routine. To William, it was easy to explain away, but beneath the surface, cracks were already forming in the life he thought was perfect. As the weeks turned into months, William began to notice subtle changes in Priya's behavior. At first, it was small things, her increasing reluctance to spend evenings at home, her growing interest in going out alone, her vague explanations when returning late. She claimed she was meeting new friends, exploring the city, and learning about Canadian culture. William tried to believe her, but the unease in his heart grew stronger with every unexplained outing. The cheerful conversations they once shared over dinner became shorter, often replaced by silence, as Priya kept her eyes fixed on her phone. Her attention to immigration paperwork became more obvious, too. She often asked William about the timeline for permanent residency and pressed him to complete official documents quickly. While she smiled and laughed during family gatherings, her questions afterward always circled back to legal status and the next steps in the process. William wanted to see it as natural curiosity, but deep down, he felt her excitement for Canada was overshadowing her interest in him. Friends and neighbors began whispering behind his back. They noticed how Priya seemed distant when William wasn't looking, how her laughter with others seemed more genuine than the polite smiles she gave her husband. Some even hinted at their concerns, but William brushed them off, unwilling to admit what he feared. His love for her became a shield against the uncomfortable truth. Nights grew colder in their home. William often sat alone in the living room, staring at the door, waiting for her to return. Each time she walked in, dressed in clothes he hadn't seen her by and wearing perfumes unfamiliar to him, a knot tightened at his chest. Though he tried to silence his doubts, the illusion of a happy marriage was beginning to slip away. One evening, while Priya was out, William found himself pacing the house, his mind filled with questions he could no longer ignore. Curiosity overcame hesitation, and he began searching through her belongings. In the back of her closet, hidden beneath folded clothes, he discovered a small envelope stuffed with documents. What he saw inside made his hands tremble. There were immigration papers carefully filled out, timelines detailing when her permanent residency would be approved, and messages printed from email exchanges with another man in India. The words were cold and calculating, speaking of plans for a future that did not include William. It became clear that Priya's marriage was never about love. The documents revealed instructions on how she intended to separate from him after securing her residency. There were even conversations about financial independence, as if she were preparing to live an entirely different life once her goals were met. William felt his chest tighten as he read line after line, each one confirming that the warmth she had shown him was nothing but a mask. The discovery left him paralyzed. Every affectionate smile, every kind gesture, every promise of devotion replayed in his head, now poisoned by the truth. He realized he had been a stepping stone, nothing more than a ticket to the life Priya had dreamed of in Canada. The humiliation was unbearable. William had believed he had finally been given a second chance at happiness, but instead, he was nothing more than a tool in a carefully planned scheme. That night, he sat alone in the dark, staring at the papers spread across the table. Rage, sorrow, and disbelief churned inside him. The foundation of his new life had shattered, and in its place was only betrayal, leaving him broken and unsure of what to do next. Despite the storm raging inside him, William forced himself to maintain a calm and collected appearance in public. He knew that if he revealed the truth too soon, it would only lead to more humiliation. So, he played the role of the loving husband, smiling when neighbors greeted them, holding Priya's hand at community events, and answering questions about their life together with rehearsed ease. To outsiders, nothing seemed wrong. Behind closed doors, however, the atmosphere was tense and suffocating. Priya carried on as if nothing had changed. She dressed elegantly, attended gatherings, and laughed freely with others. To William, her confidence was unbearable. It was as though she no longer cared to even hide her intentions. She spoke about her future openly, hinting at jobs she wanted, apartments she admired, and a life of independence that left no room for him. Each remark pierced William deeper, yet he kept his pain hidden, bottling up his anger until it silently consumed him. Friends noticed the difference in William. Once cheerful and talkative, he now seemed withdrawn, quieter than usual. He avoided conversations about his marriage, brushing them aside with vague excuses. His children sensed something was wrong, but he refused to admit what he had discovered. Instead, he carried the weight alone, torn between confronting Priya and protecting his pride. In their home, the silence grew louder. Mealtimes were strained, with Priya scrolling through her phone while William sat in silence. Nights became longer, the space between them in bed feeling wider with each passing day. William's love had turned into suspicion, his hope into despair. Yet he still clung to a fragile mask of normalcy, unwilling to reveal that the life he had fought to build was already crumbling from within. The tension in William's life reached a breaking point on a cold evening when he accidentally overheard one of Priya's phone conversations. Standing just outside the bedroom door, he caught fragments of her words. She spoke in her native language, but the meaning was unmistakable. Priya described how her new life in Canada was falling into place, how she would soon have everything she wanted, and how she no longer needed the man who had brought her there. Her tone was carefree, almost triumphant, as if she were already free from the marriage. Each word struck William like a knife, confirming every fear he had tried so hard to deny. That night, sleep was impossible. William lay awake replaying their entire relationship in his mind, from the first message she had sent him online to the moment he discovered the hidden documents. Every detail that once brought him joy now felt like a cruel performance. He saw himself not as a husband, but as a pawn in someone else's plan. The humiliation burned deeply. He had opened his home, his heart, and his savings to Priya, only to be discarded when she no longer had use for him. The days that followed were unbearable. Priya moved about the house without a care, planning outings and chatting on her phone while William sat in silence. His anger grew with every passing moment. He felt trapped between two unbearable realities: to stay in the marriage and live as a fool, or to confront her and risk losing everything. Inside him, a dangerous mix of heartbreak, resentment, and desperation began to take control. What had started as small doubts had become undeniable truth, and now the pressure of betrayal weighed on him so heavily that it pushed him closer to an irreversible decision. On a bitter winter night, the tension that had been building for months finally erupted. William sat in the dimly lit living room, the silence of the house pressing down on him. Priya arrived late, her laughter still lingering from a phone call. She quickly ended as she stepped inside. To William, it was the final insult, the final reminder that she was living her own life while using him as nothing more than a means to an end. The weight of humiliation, the sting of betrayal, and the ache of loneliness fused into something darker that he could no longer contain. The confrontation began quietly, almost hesitantly, but it escalated with frightening speed. Years of bottled frustration spilled out as William demanded answers, his voice trembling with anger and pain. Priya's dismissive tone only fueled the fire inside him. Every word she spoke sounded like mockery, every gesture like proof that she had never cared for him. The room became a battleground of emotions, where reason quickly gave way to raw fury. Overwhelmed and blinded by rage, William lost control. In a sudden, irreversible moment, he lashed out with a violence that shocked even him. Priya's cries echoed briefly before the house fell silent again, the walls bearing witness to the act that ended everything. When it was over, William stood frozen, staring at the lifeless body of the woman he once believed had given him a second chance at love. The reality of what he had done sank in slowly, like ice spreading through his veins. The living room, once filled with dreams of companionship and hope, was now a scene of tragedy. For William, there was no going back. The act that had been born from heartbreak and desperation had sealed his fate forever. The following morning, the quiet neighborhood was shattered by the sight of flashing police lights outside William's home. Word spread quickly that something terrible had happened. Neighbors, who had always watched the unusual marriage with curiosity, gathered on sidewalks in stunned silence. When officers entered the house, they found Priya's lifeless body and William sitting nearby, motionless, as if drained of everything inside him. He did not resist. With a heavy voice, he confessed to what he had done, admitting that the betrayal had broken him beyond repair. News of the crime made headlines across the country. The story sparked fierce debates about marriages built on immigration, about vulnerable older men searching for love online, and about the risks of trusting too quickly. Some people sympathized with William's loneliness and heartbreak, while others condemned his actions as monstrous and unforgivable. Priya was mourned by those who knew her in Canada and in India, though her hidden intentions complicated how people remembered her. William's trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming, and his own confession left little to argue. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, ensuring he would spend his remaining years behind bars. Sitting in a cold cell, William had endless hours to reflect on the choices that led him there. The longing for companionship, the willful blindness to red flags, and the night when rage destroyed 2 lives at once. For the community, the tragedy became a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder of how desperation for love can leave people vulnerable, and how deceit, when uncovered, can unleash devastating consequences. William had sought happiness in his final years, but instead, his story ended in sorrow, regret, and a legacy of tragedy that would haunt all who remembered it.